Hi, everybody. Welcome to my webinar today on the evolution of Asterisk. Before we get started, I did want to do a plug for AsterCon. For those who may not be aware, AsterCon registration is open along with the call for speakers. So if you have any idea about something you'd like to speak about and you'd like to share that with the Asterisk community, then please do submit a talk to the call for speakers page. You can find that linked through astercon.net, and we've plastered it everywhere. You can also find it on the Asterisk forums, social, it's everywhere. And with that, let's get started. So hi, everybody. For those who may not be aware of who I am, hopefully there's a few of you, my name is Joshua Culp, or Josh, or J Culp, or if you've been around a really long time, you can also find me as, or remember me as File. I hail from Atlantic Canada, which is further east than the Eastern time zone, in fact, and I'm the project lead for Asterisk. And within Sangoma, I'm also the team lead for Asterisk. So in that role, I support the Asterisk team at Sangoma, the company itself, that can be internal customers, external customers, and I also support contributors and the community. And I like to think of myself as the person who's generally keeping the project pointed in the general right direction. So I figure out policies, I take input, provide feedback in discussions, and make decisions on things. If you'd like to follow me on any social media, all of my links are accessible at colp.dev. With that, let's get started. So how did Asterisk come into existence? Let's do a little bit of a history lesson. In the beginning, in 1999, which I call the simpler times, and personally, I find anything before WebRTC came into existence simpler times. Once WebRTC came into existence, stuff got a lot more complicated. There was a person named Mark Spencer who had a company called Linux Support Services. And as you might expect, he was providing support for those using Linux, as it was still the early days in the maturity of Linux and the documentation. So there was still a market for that. And he needed a phone system to accept calls, but he had little money. And Mark is the type of person that he's not afraid of just making something to meet his needs when it comes to coding things. So he just wrote a phone system to meet his needs. And while this was kind of Asterisk, it's not the Asterisk that you and I are familiar with today. In fact, the Asterisk we have today is kind of the second Asterisk, originally called Asterisk NG. The first Asterisk had everything, and this includes configuration, hard-coded in C. Mark's very comfortable in C, so it was fairly easy for him to just make configuration changes through changing the code and recompile. So that covered things like changing call routing logic, adding a DID, all of that stuff was hard-coded in that C. However, as time went on, more and more interest grew in the telephony side of things with Asterisk instead of Linux support. And so ultimately, Linux became the primary focus. Mark released the version of Asterisk that we know today, with things being configurable from configuration files to make it more approachable. And he made it an open source project. It was stored in ye olde CVS version control, and it was available for download on FTP. Additional methods were added for download over time, and FTP support eventually faded away. Although just a few years ago, we actually had someone reach out to the Asterisk team at Sangoma asking where our FTP server had gone and whether it was still an option. So there are still people who think about FTP. And then ultimately, he changed the company name away from Linux Support Services over to Digium. And with this, it was full speed ahead. This was the early days of the Asterisk we know today. Mark was the sole individual doing reviews. He didn't have a really tool for doing code reviews, and he was the one responsible for merging all of the changes. So it was day in and day out working on this all day. He was quickly writing code to improve or add features based on the needs of customers now, as well as the community. and also merging bug fixes and contributions. At this point in things, issues were reported using a Mantis-based bug reporting site, and Mantis as an open source project is still alive and being used by other projects. And at this time, there was no real policy around releases, there was no long-term supported versions, and there was no official documentation beyond sample configuration files. It still was very much early days of the project. With this, a dash of more people came into the mix. As interest grew, more people in the community appeared. They helped triage bugs, and those individuals were called and still are called bug marshals. They reviewed patch files, provided input, and provided fixes. However, a single person doing everything is ultimately unsustainable in projects that grow to a certain size. So other people gained access to version control, allowing them to help out and manage things, such as merging changes and reviewing things. And then as Digium as a company grew, it hired more people to take the pressure off of Mark and to handle more and more things of the project. Until ultimately, it allowed Mark to get into a position where he was no longer a critical blocker to the project and he was able to leave. So this allowed Mark to go off on his next passion in flying. And really from a project perspective and from a team perspective at Sangoma, this is how things continue to operate today, with individuals being hired and leaving and the project lead role being passed on. The individual who held the project lead role before me is actually probably listening to this, Matt Fredrickson, who you can find on IRC as Kreslin. He's still part of the project and I talk to him regularly. And Mark himself is still sprinkled around the source code of Asterisk and Spirit, as we all still continue to rely on fundamental things that he wrote. As people have come and gone, as well, their code also remains in Asterisk. The evolution of tool usage. So tools are something that we all take for granted. Some of us may not directly interact with them, but they're still important to us without realizing it. And they facilitate the development of the project, and they also provide history. To the project and the team at Sangoma, they used to come at more of a cost due to the infrastructure requirements. However, we've kind of lessened that today. A fun fact is that the Asterisk team at Sangoma are actually the ones responsible for running and maintaining the infrastructure that the project uses. So this has meant that in the past, we've been responsible for an Atlassian stack, Garrett, and more. One of my goals as the current project lead and team lead has been to reduce that infrastructure and therefore free up developer time so we can work on other things. So let's journey through the evolution of them with the Asterisk project. In the beginning, like I said, there was the Mantis bug tracker. It was fairly simple, but it got the job done. We did modify it some at times just to add some additional functionality. A good example for those who were around from that time is we added the ability to give people karma. So if you submitted a good bug report, then you would get virtual karma essentially. Everything was reported through it with bug marshals doing triage, and it had an isolated user account. So the user account you used for Mantis was just used for Mantis. Like many open source projects, I think, and also companies, we then met, I blame that met on Sean Bright, who caught my attention just now. Like other open source projects and companies, we got into Atlassian during the beginning of Atlassian, actually. So we moved over to a self-hosted, customized Jira instance. One of my fundamental things and suggestions for anyone is if you're using a tool, don't modify it unless you absolutely have to. If you can change your process to better fit the tool, go that direction. Maintaining customized things is just extra overhead that you don't want to incur. So Jira as a tool was much more flexible, but harder to maintain from an infrastructure perspective. It's Java. Java is fun to run. A good benefit, however, is that it did provide us centralized authentication for all of our various tools that we made available. So these days, we've moved the project over to GitHub. So you can find us on github.com/asterisk. It's a well-known system by developers. It has well-known pull request methods, issue tracking. And the nice thing is we no longer have to maintain that infrastructure. And through doing so, we also simplified our process and our requirements. Code review is also important. We all reap the benefits of it. In the beginning, however, there was only basic code review done by Mark Spencer. Changes were tested by him manually, sometimes not. Otherwise, they would just go in. Community members could provide their own feedback on the ticket, and through the lack of overall code review, it did mean that there was a high chance of issues occurring, and they did occur at times. A good example is that in one case, an emergency release had to occur because the logic that handled timeouts and figuring out whether a channel should be hung up or not didn't properly handle large date timestamp stuff, if I recall correctly. So all of a sudden, asterisk instances across the world, all of the calls would just instantly hang up. Something like code review would have a better chance of catching stuff like that. And at this point in time, code was still kept in CVS. We knew we wanted to add code review to the process to improve the quality of things, so we spun up a separate tool called Review Board that changes were actually reviewed on. Changes themselves couldn't be merged through Review Board. They still had to be manually done, but we could leave comments, put in different versions of the changes, and actually work on them that way. A nice thing is we did write a custom authentication handler for this, so the same credentials used for Jira also worked for Review Board. And then before this, we actually had moved away from CVS over to Subversion as a version control system. We then decided to move over to Git, and as part of that, chose Gerrit as our solution. So Gerrit is a tool used by Google. If you do any Android stuff, they use Gerrit. And it's also written in Java, but it is easier to run than Atlassian products. So this provided both source code control and code review in one place. It too used the same authentication as Jira. And as part of this move, we also moved over to Git. So you could do your reviews within Gerrit. Everything's good, merge in there, easy. And now we use GitHub for that. So along with issues, our code review is now on GitHub as well. And this means even less infrastructure to maintain. And I didn't mention it in this presentation, but our continuous integration has also been moved to GitHub, of course, using GitHub Actions. So even less infrastructure to maintain, which is great for the Asterisk team. So mailing lists. Mailing lists are kind of a sore subject for me, to be honest, because in the modern world of email, it's difficult to run a mailing list. We do currently still have mailing lists based on an old version of Mailman. You can see them at list.digium.com. Because in the beginning, mailing lists were really the way that open source projects operated. However, today, in contrast, they see minimal use as the vast majority of people have moved over to our web-based forums instead. Their history is a great resource for things, such that when mailing lists go away, and this is something I'm investigating, we will ensure an archive of those do remain for historical purposes. The best place these days, however, for actually getting help and discussing things is our discourse instance at community.asterisk.org. I highly suggest you head over there. You can use search to find older topics and threads. It's much more active than the mailing lists. And I'm also active over there, always helping, so please check them out. Now let's talk about code contributions. Asterisk has always required a contributor license agreement in order to contribute to the project. Asterisk is dual licensed. It's licensed under GPL v2, but we can also license it in commercial purposes. And this allows Sangoma to sell and license Asterisk in a commercial fashion. In that commercial fashion, it means that someone who has licensed it is not obligated to make any changes they make available in an open source format. So in the beginning, you would need to print out the contributor license agreement, you need to sign it, and then you'd either need to fax or mail it back. This caused extra work and also reduced contributions, and was also a bit of a management headache, as that was physical stuff that had to be kept in an office and maintained. When we moved over to Jira, one of the custom additions that we actually made was a contributor license agreement plugin, which allowed the signing of the contributor license agreement to occur within Jira. However, manual approval was still required by the legal department. It was an improvement, but there was still a delay there. As part of moving to GitHub, I worked with our legal department here at Sangoma to get approval to make it automatic. So now with GitHub, we use a standard tool for CLAs. CLAs are also automatically approved, and as soon as you sign, you are able to contribute. So that has reduced the burden to actually contribute even a little bit more. Versioning and support. In the beginning, there was one branch to conquer telephony. This is a common thing with a lot of open source projects. They just start with a single branch and a single release series. That branch would include bug fixes, new features, major changes, re-architectures, you name it. This did lead to stability being an issue. However, releases were turned around quickly. And in the beginning, for those who actually deployed Asterisk, you'd probably wait maybe 4 or 5 releases before you actually trusted something was stable enough to release. However, as things progress, a release branch was eventually created that just received backported bug fixes, while the development branch continued ever forward. This improved stability because things weren't majorly changing in the release branch, but it was still early days on policy and process, and a new release branch would be created as felt appropriate. These days, we have a well-defined, long-term supported and standard release process. So as the project progressed, this policy was put into place to allow the flexibility of major changes while still giving users more stability and a long-term supported solution. I harp on this every year, but it's a good reminder. LTS releases are supported for 4 years and 1 year of security. Standard releases are supported for 1 year and then an additional year of security. And standard releases receive major breaking changes and deprecations. So if something is going to remove a dial plan application, that has to be done in a standard release first before it can graduate to the next long-term supported release. This also incorporated more defined timelines on releases. So the general target for normal releases, for example, I'm going to go for 20.6.0 because 20.5.0 is kind of special, which I'll elaborate on after this because why not? Generally, those are every 4 to 6 weeks and then once a year for major releases. The only time that it's not truly every 4 to 6 weeks is if we're doing that major release. We give a little bit of head time and synchronize stuff up so that releases don't occur of Asterisk 20 that include changes which aren't present in the first release of Asterisk 21. That happened previously and caused a lot of confusion, so we synchronize those so that that confusion is eliminated. The policy around features has also changed over time as well. The original policy was no new features in release branches. This has been relaxed over time to allow new features that are backwards compatible and from a developer perspective, ABI compatible to be incorporated into release branches. And when I say release branches, I'm talking about Asterisk 18 and Asterisk 20 currently. However, test coverage is highly preferred if possible to ensure things don't break. There is some leeway in judgment there depending on things, but it is highly preferred. Now, certified asterisk is kind of a wild card that can confuse a lot of people. So this is a version of asterisk for customers of Sangoma. We do make the source code and releases available. However, it does not receive bug fixes or changes unless reported by a customer of Sangoma with an agreement. This means that if you don't have that agreement and you post an issue for it, that issue is not going to be enacted on. In general, we target a major version every 1 to 2 times a year. That's extremely flexible depending on things, and then minor versions as needed. And this is because fundamentally, open source releases aren't driven based on any of our commercial customer needs. Certified allows us to do a release for them on a schedule that better fits them. So I try to keep those two separated. Testing is important. In the beginning, Mark did manual testing of changes. Community members helped out and reported issues with changes, but ultimately it wasn't sustainable and didn't provide regression testing or complete testing. And one of the things that's actually not really been too fundamentally altered over time is our test suite. So this is a Python-based test suite solution that's custom for Asterisk. The only recent major change that's occurred is bringing it up to date so it can work on Python 3, but it allows tests to be written in YAML, SIP scenario files, Python, and it provides test coverage of many parts of Asterisk. So we test PJ-SIP transfers, and when I mean transfers, I mean attended, blind. We check whether caller ID is updated as appropriate, covers voicemail, normal calling, and more. This runs on every change that is put up for review, as well as nightly. Documentation. Everyone always likes to say that documentation sucks. In the beginning, that would be an accurate statement. So Asterisk has always included sample configuration files in the configs directory of the tree. These, however, were manually written and options may not be present. To this day, they are still manually written, but since we go through a code review process, we can generally say, hey, you need to add this to the sample configuration file. In the early days, lacking that resulted in some things just being hidden by omission on accident. So things would exist, features would exist that no one really had an idea about. We changed things a little bit in this area. So in Asterisk, the source code itself, there's now XML blobs of documentation for things. This allows them to live directly with the code itself. We do use this XML to generate online documentation, and we also use it to enforce in newer code the actual presence of that documentation. So a good example is if someone adds an option to PJ-SIP and doesn't document it, that option's not going to work. That documentation has to be done. The wiki. So we also did have a Confluence wiki as part of our Atlassian stack. Generated documentation was put here from the XML that I just mentioned, and then manually written material covering how to use Asterisk, development ideas, guides, and stuff were also put on the wiki. As part of our move to GitHub and away from Atlassian, we've now moved away from that wiki to our new documentation site at docs.asterisk.org. Content was taken from Confluence, we changed it into Markdown, and put it onto the documentation site. A nice change and opportunity as a result of this is that this documentation is now versioned and stored on GitHub. So anyone can make changes or contribute if they want through a normal GitHub pull request process. Previously, in the case of Confluence, we would need essentially to show that you understood Confluence, and then we would grant you permissions, but there was no code review process or documentation review process as a result of that. This also does continue to include the generated documentation from the XML that was embedded in Asterisk. So now let's talk code. In the beginning, Asterisk was a phone system, and features and additions were centered around this. Voicemail, call recording, monitoring of calls, just normal calls themselves. However, over time, this slowly changed with the addition and extension of AGI and AMI, to talk about here in a sec, to allow more call control level operations. And as of Asterisk 12, this was really accelerated with the addition of ARI, the Asterisk REST interface, such that Asterisk is now more of a toolkit, giving the foundational blocks to be many things, some of which don't even require your logic to live within Asterisk. And I say toolkit, for those who may not be aware, which is probably a lot of you, I'm gonna fly back because I want an image here. I have a lot of slides. So in my opening, you would have seen this little character on the left-hand side. His name is actually Kit, and it comes from toolkit. So he is the mascot of Asterisk. And if you look on his arm, you can actually see a little Asterisk speech bubble. So if you ever see him, his name is Kit. And we will also have him at AstroCon if you'd like to take a picture with him. Let's fly back to where I was. CLAs, always fun. Versioning, always fun. And we're almost there. A toolkit. So control of Asterisk now extends outside of Asterisk to other languages with friendly but powerful primitives. So those would be call bridging, recording, and playback. Some examples include a phone system, a conference server, video meeting server, a distributed call center, media server, a transcription service, and more. As well as things in the code area have changed, how we do things and how we actually develop Asterisk has changed as well. Consideration is seriously given to the impact of any changes we make to Asterisk, both from the perspective of developers and also users. So for both of them, that would be, does this break existing stuff? Is it consumable? Does it make sense? Is it easy to understand? And one of the core things is, part of that, we don't want to break things. In the olden times of Asterisk, things would break all the time. We want it to be stable so that we can all sleep nice at night. So there's a focus on quality over quantity. To accomplish this, code review is formally done with, at a minimum, 2 people providing input. If a change is sufficiently large, we may want more input, so we'll ask for more people to provide input and review things. We also do have coding guidelines that we do enforce and expect people to use. And we do regular releases under that 4 to 6 week timeline. And that's to reduce the number of changes in each release, so that if something catastrophic does happen as a result of that, we're able to more easily find it and identify what's going on. As a project, we now also have written down policies. In the past, we didn't. And through all of this, it's helped to build up a lot of trust in the project. Like I said before, in the olden times, you would wait 4 to 5 releases before you would consider upgrading. And nowadays, upgrades are just generally a nothing for people, which is something we like to see. While I said Asterisk is a toolkit, don't be afraid. Traditional dial plan applications and functions do remain in Asterisk, and I call these fully implemented components. So a voicemail implementation, the voicemail app, dial, record, mix monitor, that kind of stuff. Some older ones have been deprecated. Please see the doc site for that, with important ones being macro and monitor. In the case of macro, the replacement for that is GoSub, and in the case of monitor, the replacement for that is mixmonitor. And new ones do continue to be accepted, and existing ones continue to receive changes. A good example of that is through our acquisition of NetFortris. They had some Asterisk changes that we incorporated into open source Asterisk, and one of those was for voicemail, adding some additional CLI and AMI actions. AMI, the Asterisk Manager Interface. For those who may not be familiar with that, it's a simple TCP-based interface with a key value pair protocol. It lets you see events and control some aspects of Asterisk. This too remains, not going away. It continues to see new AMI actions and events added as needed. Like I said just before, as a result of NetFortris, it's got some new voicemail AMI actions to allow control over voicemail boxes, such as marking a voicemail as read or unread. ARI is the newest interface to Asterisk, so it's the Asterisk REST interface. It's an HTTP WebSocket interface that allows you to write telephony applications. HTTP side provides the primitives to facilitate the writing of these applications. Essentially, there are actions that you can do. And then WebSockets provide events to know what is happening with things in Asterisk, such as DTMF being pushed, a channel being hung up, that kind of stuff. And ARI provides call bridging, call control, recording, playback, external media. It's got a lot of stuff. And one of the goals of ARI is to make things as approachable and friendly as possible so people can write their own telephony applications. And within this context, when I'm saying telephony application, I'm talking about you can write a distributed call center using ARI if you want, or your own voicemail application. There's lots of options there. PJ-SIP remains critically important in Asterisk. It's the current SIP implementation we're using. It uses an outside third-party SIP stack, PJ-SIP. We have a great relationship with them and do contribute all the changes we can back to them. But fundamentally, it's designed and implemented differently than the original Chance SIP. Configuration is differently. A nice thing as a result of its implementation, however, is that it's extremely modular, which has allowed us to really speed up development of features and functionality within the SIP protocol. And because things are more isolated and there's specific defined ways of doing things, it also has less potential for regressions. And it has test coverage in our test suite. In contrast to Chance SIP didn't really have a defined design. It was more of an organic thing that just kind of grew over time. At one point, I did the math, and it was pretty much a 75% chance that if you did a change to Chance SIP, something would cause a regression. It's very, very brittle. To that end, Chance SIP has been removed from Asterisk 21. So if you go and download the current release candidate of Asterisk 21, the Chance SIP code is not in there. You can't use Chance SIP, you must use Chan PJ-SIP. WebRTC. We've had far richer support thanks to the design of the Chan PJ-SIP module. It has the same basics as Chan SIP, covering the fundamentals, so ICE stun turn, DTLS, SRTP, and WebSockets. However, its design made it easier to add additional things such as bundle support, transport CC, REMB, NAC, and multi-stream support. And we continue to develop the Chan PJ-SIP module as needed as new stuff comes up. Configuration is also a critically important thing. Asterisk started with configuration files. So INI style configuration files, so still exist today. Support was added along the road for databases. However, there was no centralized way of handling that database support. Instead, each consumer of the database support, such as Chance SIP, had their own implementation and caveats of that, of how things behaved. A common thing you would see in the forums and to this day in the mailing list is, I've configured Chance SIP to use a database, I've done pjsip show peers, and none of my peers are there. And that's because that's the way ChanSIP did things. Only stuff that was actually stored in memory showed up in pjsip show peers. As things went on, a standardized handling of configuration was added in something I call sorcery. Validation of that configuration was also added with a different philosophy of, if we're uncertain of configuration or your configuration doesn't make sense, we're not going to accept your configuration and give you notice and force you to fix it, so you can be assured that the resulting behavior of things is what you expect. Older modules such as ChanSIP would just keep on trucking. In some cases, that could cause security issues if you expected one thing but got another. So validation was added. We also added support for push configuration using ARI, and we also improved the database interaction by having a consistent, defined, centralized way of handling that database interaction. And alongside that, that allowed us to add a much more flexible, configurable, realistic caching strategy for the users of that. So anything using sorcery, which pjsip does, of course, if you're on a database, you throw a cache in front of it, you can configure that cache however you want. You can have it cache everything. You can have objects expire after a certain amount of time. You can have them asynchronously update in the background so your calls aren't blocked waiting on your database. It's got a lot of flexibility. Now let's talk about the future a bit. Performance. Performance is that thing that everyone always wants to improve, and the Asterisk project also wants to improve. However, to improve performance, you need to quantify the performance. So we would like to add performance testing to our test suite using a common set of scenarios so that we're able to know when performance regresses, improves, or just changes in general, to allow us to be able to act faster, there we go, on performance changes. There are cases where you're making a change and you think it's obvious performance will improve, but in practice, it doesn't. So an easier way to actually test gut feelings and stuff like that through the test suite would have a great impact on things. The cloud. Everything is in the cloud now, including Asterisk. I'm not just referring to those who may have an EC2 instance or a DigitalOcean droplet that just have Asterisk running on that instance. I'm talking about in a more, as a component within more of a cluster kind of environment. We want to make it a better citizen there by identifying ways we can make it easier for Asterisk to be part of the cluster. So configuration, monitoring, discovery, networking, and logging. Just seeing what we can do there to better improve how Asterisk fits in that. And then finally, the current craze, AI. No one can deny that AI is currently popular, and we want to ensure that Asterisk can be used as a component with it. When I say that, I mean the AI support may not be within Asterisk itself, but we want to ensure that there's the ability to connect elsewhere to facilitate it. So a good example of that is the external media support in ARI that allows us to send a media stream out to an outside application, be it written in Node, Go, Rust, etc., and have that application interact with any number of services that it wants. For example, using Google speech to text and then running it through another service to do analysis of what they said to determine an intention. So we'd like to extend this as needed. If there's areas we can improve to better make that interaction easier, and that's something we'd like to explore. So those are the current three major things for the future of Asterisk that we'd like to look at. Questions? There's currently a discussion on IRC about ChanSIP. So ChanSIP, I'm sure it'll live on for a very long time. As always, if you do have questions, you can submit them through the GoToWebinar system. and they will show up. Seriously? Come on, people, give me questions. I'm here. A question on IRC. Will ChanSIP be supported in certified Asterisk versions? ChanSIP has not been supported in certified Asterisk for a large number of years. And I will give context as to how module support states actually work, because it may be something people aren't aware of. In Asterisk, modules have what are called a module support level or support state. They can be core, they can be extended, and they can be deprecated. Modules which are marked as core are supported by the Asterisk development team at Sangoma, meaning if you file an issue against them, then we will put that into our backlog and it'll get prioritized accordingly. Extended support modules are supported by the community, meaning they don't go into the Asterisk team's workflow at Sangoma. And so it's up to community members. And then for deprecated, they will eventually be removed according to our deprecation policy. Certified Asterisk, from a support agreement perspective, only supports core level modules. If you use an extended support, we will do our best, but it's not covered under any SLA and is no guarantee. Okay, I'm now getting questions. Why did you say Asterisk 21.5 was special? So it's not, Asterisk 21 itself isn't special, but when there's the time period between the release in October and the release candidate, we do release candidates for all of the current supported versions of Asterisk. So that's currently 20, 18, and now 21 at the same time, meaning there's a larger amount of time between us doing a release candidate and actually releasing those. So that's just why it's special. In the past, we wouldn't do that, and what would happen is Asterisk 20 and 18 would get released with features that aren't in the first release of Asterisk 21. And so it caused confusion for people. So we just streamlined that. Elvita already answered this, but I'll do it verbally. Will this webinar be available to download to review offline later? The question is yes. It'll be posted to social media. That wasn't a question, it was a statement. It'll be posted to social media. There we go. The current question, if I wanted to use a large language model I am training to answer calls on my Asterisk system, would that be through an API? Yes. It depends if you want to do it post-processing, in which case your best option would be to record the call using Mix Monitor and then add a hang-up handler that gets called when the channel is hung up. And you can then trigger an outside script that feeds in the recording as part of your training. If you wanted to do it live, then you could use the ARI approach with external media and what is called a snoop channel, which essentially allows you to fork the audio from a channel and send it wherever you want. In that case, you would send it over to the external media and it would get shipped off to your real-time application. Maybe I missed it, but where can we grab the latest Asterisk 21? Was it GitHub? So Asterisk 21 currently has a release candidate out, RC1. It will be officially released next month in October. You can grab that release candidate on GitHub as a release. Next question, integration with Dynamics 365. There's no current plans, or within the scope of Asterisk, I'm not aware of anything, and I don't think I've seen anything from a community perspective. Are you aware of any efforts to expose more observability / telemetry for cloud deployments, for example, via Prometheus? I'm not currently aware of anyone working to extend it, there have been a few fixes in the last 6 to 8 months for the Prometheus support for a few specific types of objects, I think bridges being one, and a few others, but I haven't seen anyone mention anywhere extending those. But as part of the interest in the cloud side, looking at that would certainly be something we would be considering. Is EEX going to be supported or it will be retired at some point? It's not currently deprecated, it is currently core supported. From a Sangoma perspective, I may look at changing that to be extended support because from a company perspective and just our interactions with customers and our own products, EEX doesn't really get used anymore. It's primarily PJSIP. So it may become community supported, and then depending on that, may one day eventually go deprecated, but we'll see. Next question. Can we get a voicemail storage system that works with distributed systems? No more numbered files that need renames every time. Sorry if this is already a thing. I'm still on an older version. So it's not currently a thing. The options for app voicemail are currently the numbered file. It does have ODBC support, and it does have an IMAP integration. As part of the ARI support, we ensured that the foundation and APIs there were sufficient for doing this externally outside of Asterisk to allow things like this to better happen. Because app voicemail being a C implementation, which is quite large, is quite difficult to work with. But if you do it externally, then you can use tons of solutions, tons of toolkits, tons of SDKs to better facilitate such a thing. So I'm not going to say it won't happen, but the recommendation is to build something to your liking in ARI. I'm trying to build a real-time translation solution using Asterisk, like two people talking in different languages, and voice will be converted to their local language, then will be played to the customer. Is it possible? It should be possible using ARI. You can, ARI external media does allow you to provide Asterisk as well into, or allow you to provide audio into Asterisk as well. So you would just need to ship audio back and forth. So using ARI, there's a recurring theme here. ARI lets you do a lot of cool things. I think this would be achievable in using ARI. What about TDM interfaces and the support policy, SS7, etc.? So the only thing that the Asterisk team technically takes care of is libPRI, which we did do a release recently, I think a month or two ago, finally. We also do review Chan-Dotty changes. However, we are not well versed in Chan-Dotty. So it is still there, it is still core supported, and it does work, and changes do go in. From the Dotty perspective, the actual kernel level stuff, that's a separate project. It's at github.com/asterisk/Dotty, and is headed by a separate team that I believe they are trying to come up with a better process and automation, and ensure that they are able to do releases more often. Is it the same process to install Asterisk? Back in the days, I had to compile it, find dependencies depending on the distro. Is it the same today? It is the same. Fundamentally, it is the same. However, there is an install _ prereq script in the contrib/scripts directory, which is aware of different Linux distributions and will install the dependencies required to build Asterisk. So personally, that's how I ensure my systems have the sufficient dependencies installed to build the vast majority of Asterisk. So my recommendation is to is to take a gander at that. Ah, Sean Bright, I'm even calling you out by name. Are there any large/interesting projects that Sangoma is currently working that you can talk about that will end up in open source Asterisk? Is there any interesting stuff? Nothing that immediately comes to mind. A lot of our time has been spent on the whole GitHub thing, so kind of regrouping on stuff. But if such things occur, they will show up on GitHub. Everything goes on GitHub. We are not immune to that. Hey, lots of questions for once. Can I make this bigger? No. Are there any plans to allow PJSIP in Asterisk to natively support Teams direct routing? That's not currently something the Asterisk team at Sangoma is working on. I am aware that there are patches out there to do it, but so far none have been contributed back to the project itself. So potentially one day when I maybe have interest in it, I might do it, but it's not currently something we're looking into. Are you currently doing tests with ARM architecture boxes? Works for me, just curious. Not currently. I am aware that there are people who use it. It's not something we currently target. From a platform perspective, the policy is currently x86, 64-bit under the main Linux distribution. So that's Debian, Ubuntu, the Red Hat flavors, that kind of stuff. Personally, I also do keep tabs on Manjaro as well for Arch, just to see. Another question about EX2 being currently supported, which I answered. What do you think of FreePBX? That's a question in of itself. I think it depends on what you define FreePBX to be. Personally, I find FreePBX, it gives you a lot of freedom. And I think of it conceptually myself more as a configuration system for Asterisk versus something like an appliance. There's pros and cons either way. Like I said, you get lots of flexibility things, lots of flexibility in how you do things, but you do need to be more aware of what's going on. Something like Switchvox uses Asterisk underneath, as should surprise no one. They're on the latest version of Asterisk certified. Is more, it's Asterisk is an implementation detail that as a deployer and a user, you don't need to think about because it's just an appliance. And now I'm getting called out because it's a very diplomatic response. I mean, that's generally my thoughts. Do you have any official Asterisk-based container, let's say for Kubernetes/Docker, etc.? From a project perspective, we do not currently have any official Asterisk-based container. There have been attempts by people, and there is actually a feature request for it. However, the problem that's been run into is that no one can agree on what such a container image would look like or how it would work. So right now, not so much. If someone comes up with something and gets some agreement across a few people, that would be something I would consider promoting and then seeing the response to that. And if it gained enough traction, then we could bring it into the official project fold as the official image. With PJSIP, is there a way to easily have the from and p-asserted identity headers configured separately, i.e. they are configured with different variables? Not currently. They are pretty much the same thing. The only case that it isn't is if you set the from user setting on the PJSIP endpoint, that will then override the from header to be that value instead of caller ID. But it is not currently possible to independently set them. Ooh, wow, lots of questions. I got 5 minutes. I mean, technically I could probably keep going. No one would dare stop me. But then I'll invite others in. Cool. I have respect for the legacy testing script. However, is there a desire for the development team to move to solutions like OpenQA for unit testing of Asterisk? Thank you. Not really, to be quite honest. I'm happy with the way our unit testing goes, the way our functional testing goes. Our test suite does a lot of stuff for us behind the scenes, so it would be hard to let go of that, and probably a large sink of time too. Any other integration with WebRTC, like a new channel based on Give connection for VoIP infrastructure? Not currently. It would be possible for someone to write such a channel driver, but I'm not aware of anyone doing so, and the SIP implementation seems to work well. That's been answered. Answered that. What is your feedback about the deploy of Asterisk in WSL2? For those who may not be aware, WSL2 is Windows subsystem for Linux version 2. If it helps people, I'm all for it. I would not consider it a core supported platform of the project, but we're certainly not trying to hinder its usage or anything. The only thing that's come up that I recall is the networking aspect of it being slightly annoying. Also, who authored the ARI concept for Asterisk and who currently maintains it? I think ARI originally came from a person called David Lee, who is still at Sangoma. He is, technically speaking, my manager. I like to say technically manager because I don't believe I really have managers. As for who currently maintains it, that's the current Asterisk development team at Sangoma. So that's myself, George Joseph, Mike Burdine, and Sam Benford. Can we have a way to add examples to the docs more easily, like I added to cut? You need to Google and go to forums. I think it should be documented. So the XML documentation that's alongside cut should allow, or it does allow, examples and such to be added. If there's improvements there that could be done, we'd certainly be open to them. Questions. Can you comment on code stability over time, as in internal changes breaking third-party additions, like API changes? I got reminded when you talked about modifying tools. So it's happened. The great big breaking was going from Asterisk 11 to Asterisk 12. That was a fundamental internal shift that trickled out externally to AMI and other places, trickled out to CDRs. It went tons of places. So these days, we do follow SEMVer versioning. We do try to keep those up to date. That's part of the release process too. But we try our best not to break internal or external tools, third-party additions, etc. There are, of course, cases where that can't be avoided, but we try our best to minimize those as possible. Do you think at some point text-to-speech and speech-to-text, or yeah, that should be STT, will come as a dial plan application? So speech-to-text does exist as a dial plan application currently. It's using the speech dial plan applications, or speech background, speech create. There is no built-in engine within Asterisk itself. However, recently we did add support for using an external application to do essentially the conversion. It's called AEAP. There are blog posts. You can find those on asterisk.org/blog. So you can plug it into Google, for example. That's our example implementation. It's written in Node.js. For text-to-speech, I hope one day that it will occur. currently not something being worked on. I'm ignoring you, Sean Bright. You know why. What are the pros and cons of containerizing Asterisk with Docker? Pros, it can be easier to deploy, easier to control everything. The major con that I have and see is just the networking aspect. It complicates things. Even non-containerized situation, when it comes to networking, can be problematic. The example I always go to is don't use an EC2 instance as your first jumping point to learn about VoIP, because you're now learning about the networking aspects of AWS alongside the VoIP aspects and Asterisk. So start with something that just gives you a nice public IP on your instance immediately. But this comment even applies to VoIP in general when it comes to Docker. One provider had to write their own network implementation for Docker to get the results they needed within their environment. Networking in VoIP is just, it's complicated. What are the plans for the cloud optimization you mentioned? Is there already some documentation available? Not yet. It's interests that we'd like to work on, but haven't been started yet. I answered that. We're almost done. Is CentOS still? Oh, there we go. Is CentOS still valid? Yes. We still technically support it if you want to use CentOS. What are the best learning resources out there for Asterisk? It depends on what exactly you're trying to learn. The book, while old, is still great. It gives you a solid base of understanding. I'm referring to the Asterisk book from O'Reilly. The documentation site is great. Even just reading posts on our community forums can be extremely enlightening in things. And if you do have questions about things, don't hesitate to ask on community.asterisk.org. Is there a hidden message behind Kit and the BSD daemon? They look like cousins. Nope. I mean, honestly, no. Kit came from a realization in marketing that the free PBX mascot called Tango, we needed a mascot for Asterisk, and there was various different options from a designer we had of like animals and stuff. And the wild card was Kit, and we liked it. He wasn't called Kit at that time. I just said he could be Kit because of toolkit, and so that's what we went with. Clean up. Where to learn Asterisk A to Z, basic to advanced? Are there any courses available? I believe there is some content on the Sangoma University site. Otherwise, just the documentation and book and stuff that I previously mentioned. We also have a comment regarding Asterisk in Docker or Kubernetes. Use Mac VLAN. That was their suggestion. This is which OS is best? Linux is technically the OS. There is no best these days. It's whatever you are comfortable with. Personally, I'm split across Pop OS, which is an Ubuntu derivative. My servers use a Ubuntu server, and I've got a Manjaro Arch Linux-based laptop. For infrastructure, George Joseph likes Red Hat-based stuff at times, so sometimes that's Red Hat, sometimes it's Ubuntu. It's whatever you like. And I think that concludes my questions. So I would like to invite Lauren and Mike White. I don't know why I'm inviting them, but they're here. But they're muted.
Hi there.
And Lauren's here too.
Everyone. Lauren here. I don't have anything prepared. Good presentation.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Appreciate the info.
I was going to say, if anyone does have questions about free PBX, that's Lauren's side of things. And if anyone has any salesy questions, that's Mike's side of things. So if anyone has any questions along those lines, feel free to pop them in, and I've just voluntold them to answer.
Okay, I'll monitor the questions. I'll ask a question since as an organizer, I don't seem to be able to write one in. I was wondering if the word digium, that if that has some secret meaning behind it, or if it's a portmanteau of other words. I don't recall ever hearing how it came to be.
I don't remember either. That predates me quite a bit.
As well.
Matt Frederickson may know, who is listening to this and might put it on IRC for my relaying. I also feel as though I should do a final reminder regarding Astricon. Astricon.net registration is open. If you have a topic for speaking, don't hesitate to fill out the speaker proposal.
And I'll exploit my unmuted mic status with the announcement that we have resumed our open source lounge sessions starting tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. It's in Sangoma Meet. You can find the links to join on social media if you want to say hi to anyone involved in free PBX and or Asterisk project. It's a bit of a grab bag as to who shows up and what we discuss, but it's an opportunity to do face-to-face with project leaders, contributors, and followers.
I should make note that I probably won't be there because it's late for me and I'm a zombie.
Since you're east of east.
I mean, technically, Lauren, for everyone unaware, technically Lauren and I are in the same time zone too. The only two people at Sangoma in this time zone, actually. You have questions?
I do indeed. I'm looking. Oh my goodness, there's a flood of them. Where are we starting from, Josh? Question for Mr. Gates, is that one?
Yes.
Question for Mr. Gates. Will his Fun with Dial Plan talk return to Astricon 2024? So I have not chosen a subject. I am committed to speak for Astricon 2024, which is mid-February in Florida. I have not chosen a topic yet, but given my proclivity for the absurd, it is entirely likely or possible that it will align similarly with my previous presentations. That's an answering non-answer. What is current certification path? Ralph, I will send you an email address and follow up with that, or if somebody else can get Ralph's contact information, or you can just leave it as a question. We'll follow up. There's a comment about the visual appearance of free PBX. Request for the GUI to be more clean. Okay, thank you for your suggestion. We'll make it more clean for the next version.
There's a question here from David Irod. Will Asterisk be licensed? I don't know what you mean by that exactly. If you can clarify in an additional question, then I'll see if I can answer. As well, will the sessions for Astricon this year be recorded? Yes. That's all I can say.
Have your email address, Ralph. I'll reach out shortly.
You have a second one too.
So I do. Antonio, do you want to share your email address as well via the question, and I'll add you to the list. And it looks like a third one, certification available. So anyone who has a request specifically regarding Asterisk certification, if you want to leave your email address as a question, we'll reach out after the after the presentation.
We're also, our email addresses ourselves are not too hard to find either, if you want to email Lauren directly. Any other additional questions before we call this webinar to an end?
Going once.
Going twice. Well, thank you everyone for coming to hear me ramble about stuff and things. As always, I will also be speaking at AstraCon. So if you do come, you will hear me speak there too. And everyone have a great morning, afternoon, evening, or night.